The time has come.
I like that.
The time is now for Victoria Stilwell's Positively Podcast. She's a world-renowned dog trainer.
Seen enough dogs today, have you?
She's the host of It's Me or the Dog.
I'm coming to train you.
Along with co-host Holly Ferfer.
You don't play around with that name, do you?
I am a fan of sweaty balls.
She's Victoria Stillwell, and she's ready to go.
This is a lovely way to start the day.
You get the busy bee. I need to trim her whiskers.
I see some poo here.
I feel a little bit better now because I'm the only one who usually feels stupid during the podcast.
Now, let's head to the studio and get this Positively Podcast started.
Welcome to the podcast. Holly has a day off today, but she will be back, I promise you. And I am joined by wonderful dog behaviorist Andrew Hale. He is one of our speakers at the Dog Behavior Conference. If you don't have your ticket yet, it is April the 16th to the 18th, 2021. It is virtual again this year, so it doesn't matter where in the world you are. Please come and join us for 3 days of absolute wonderful dog geekdom. There are many incredible speakers, and if you can't make it live to all of the talks, because really who can for 3 days, don't worry, you will have access to every presentation for a year. So register at positively.com/DBC and come and join us. I will be live all 3 days. I will be your MC as well. I will be doing a talk with the wonderful Joshua Leeds about how sound impacts your dog. And there are some incredible speakers. We have Alexandra Horowitz, Adam McClosey, Claudia Fugaza, Sarah Heath, Sarah Fisher, Kathy Murphy. And that's not all. There are many more, including the wonderful Andrew Hale. And you cannot miss his presentation because it's going to blow your mind. And without further ado, I think it's about time that I introduce our guest. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Victoria. Thanks for having me back.
Well, okay. So you're going to talk about a topic that it's not new, but it certainly gets people discussing because it's not widely practiced. And I want to kind of delve a little bit into what you're going to be talking about at the conference, but I want to move a little beyond that too. So if you could just kind of give an overview about what you're going to talk about.
Okay, well, I'm doing a bit of a double team with Kathy Murphy. She's an amazing canine neuroscientist, and Dr. Kathy Murphy, actually should give Kathy her full title. So she's going to deal with all the geeky science stuff, so that's great. So that's actually left me to have more of a philosophical look at things and just to kind of ask some questions, right? And we're calling it Beyond the Operant. Now, the important word there is beyond. So it's not get rid of the operant or let's bin the operant. It's let's just think beyond the operant. Let's just think about behavior in perhaps a different way. And as you say, this isn't new stuff. There's a lot of people been talking about these things. But for the mainstream, I think we need to consider about how we've ended up traditionally looking at dog behavior, right? And that has been through a lens of judging the behavior first. So do we want this behavior? Or in our minds thinking, what behavior do I want? Important word there is I. What behavior do I want there? And that's created a very much an operant approach, which is like, great. Because we're good trainers, regardless of what methods or tools you're using, we have become really good at changing behavior or creating it. And this is what I call the operant merry-go-round.
I talk about changing behavior. I talk about changing behavior all the time. But carry on. But
yeah, true. And I think that, and we all think about those things. I think the one thing that's been missing is thinking about the emotional experience for the animal that lay behind those behaviors in the first place. Now, this is the thing, using operant means or thinking about things in an operant way is in itself not a problem because we know that operant mechanics works. We know that it can be very effective to be able to change or create or modify behavior. But some of the questions we ask, I think we're kind of asking them the wrong way around. Because we've ended up, without meaning to, a lot of the time, projecting our human narrative onto that story. We've decided unilaterally and arbitrarily, those are two words I'm going to say a lot in my talk, what that behavior should be without thinking about what the animal's emotional experience is behind it. Now, as some people who've heard me speak before will know, I've got a human psychology background. So my passion really is about exploring the emotional experience, not just for the dog, but also for us. And this is where it gets really interesting, right? And this is what I'm going to be touching on in the talk. We also have to recognize our own emotional experience. And the talk is based around a very simple premise, really, which I'm not going to give away now. We're going to keep people in suspense. Buy tickets if you haven't already. And you can hear what that is. But it's basically around the fact that we are, as a species, very judgmental of behavior, and I'm going to be going through why that is. There's lots of reasons why we tend to be quite judgmental of other people's or our dog's behavior. And it's important that we understand the dynamic of that to recognize why we've ended up with quite an operant approach when we end up dealing with animals. It's not just dogs, it's other animals as well. The talk is going to be looking at exploring more about the emotional response, the emotional experience that drives it, whilst also recognizing our own emotional experience as well. It's really important because we have to recognize the emotional experience of the carer, for example. They're living with a dog who is posing all these challenges through their behavior. They have their own expectations based upon their own judgments and their own emotional experience. And I think, in a way, we feel that we've moved forwards as an industry because we've moved away from, or we've tried to move away from, some of the harsher tools, some of the more oppressive methods. But I would argue that actually maybe we've just moved on. So we're doing the same thing, which is that behavior, we don't want it, we've decided that it's this, that, and the other, and we're going to change it or modify it or create a new one. We're just trying to do it a bit nicer. And I think if we want to truly move forwards as an industry, we need to start having bigger discussions. We need to start turning to our colleagues in who, you know, with ethology and psychology and neurology and all these ologies that are out there that we've kind of turned our back on for some reason during this kind of course of time. And to do that, that is about stepping into the emotional experience. So thinking about what drives it. Now, there's a word that I use a lot, which I'm going to be building up to on my talk, so that'll be the kind of end of the talk really, which is the word relief. Because when we think about the emotional... My
favorite word. It's become my favorite word. It truly has. I mean, my favorite word used to be safety. It still is safety. That's the headline. But I think now that listening to you speak, that has become my favorite word.
Well, it's such a cool word because it kind of just says it all in that one word. I think it kind of transcends the kind of conditioning terminologies we use. It kind of transcends operant or classical or any other type of conditioning conversation, because it is very much about the innate need when we end up in an elevated state of any type, that need for relief. And actually, a lot of the behaviors that we give, I would argue, we need to start thinking of them as relief-seeking behaviors. Because when we start thinking that way, then we can actually just step back from our own judgment and narrative. And with a bit of empathy, we can start thinking, right, what is this animal's emotional experience then? What is it that actually they're doing through that behavior that, yes, does annoy me, yes, it does upset me, or yes, might be, from a legal point of view, very challenging, because some of these behaviors the law has very strict view on some of these behaviors, and just gives us a chance to step back, take a breath, and think about the animal's emotional experience that was triggering it. And as you and I have discussed before on the podcast I've been on with you before, a lot of the discussions that we have, especially on our side of the fence, on the kind of positive reinforcement, more progressive side of the fence, we tend to take the argument to those who use more outdated methods and tools. We tend to take the argument still within an operant conversation. It's what I call the operant merry-go-round. And if we truly want to step away from that and actually allow caregivers to recognize what they really need to do in order to support their wonderful companions, we need to shift more towards educating them in learning about their dog's emotional experience. Because then it becomes a no-brainer, right? Why would you want to, one, put the dog in that situation in the first place, right? Or secondly, why would you want to use an aversive just to stop the animal from trying to communicate the relief that they're seeking? And one thing we've got to think about, and this it might be a little bit controversial, I know, but If as a force-free trainer, positive reinforcement trainer, whatever label we like to give ourselves, if you turn up to see the client and the first thing you're doing when you're there is, yes, this behavior, we don't want it. I'm going to show you how we change that behavior. We don't do it in a horrible way anymore. We do it in this nice way. There is a good chance the client still is subconsciously or consciously listening and hearing behavior bad, must change it. So if it doesn't quite work out with us and they go down and see the shop down the road who gives the same output, behavior bad, let's change it, the client hasn't really moved forward, at all in that kind of understanding of their dog's emotional need. So that's why relief is such an important word. You know, when we start talking in terms of sensitive, relief, support, safety, you see, safety is a cool word. It's a very powerful one, right? Then we start recognizing the emotional experience. And that's what I think we need to think about as an industry, about where do we make these discussions moving forward? How can we be the best advocates we can for these amazing animals who are struggling a lot of the time to process in their own unique way? And that's important because we're all unique, right? We all have our own stories to tell. We all have our own experiences. They're desperately trying to let us know what it is that they need for them to be able to process things in a safe way that makes sense so they can self-regulate. The fact they're dysregulating, which is obviously the challenging behaviors, if we're just going in there arbitrarily, unilaterally looking to change behavior without recognizing that emotional need, we're just getting a human-based result again. It's based on a human-based criteria.
So let me use an example of how important it is to understand the dog's emotional experience of the situation that they're in. We have over here, a few weeks ago, the first dogs, Major and Champ Biden, two German Shepherds, beautiful German Shepherds. Champ is about 13 years old, I think, or maybe he's 11 years old. Anyway, he's the older dog, and Major is the younger dog that they rescued from, the Bidens rescued from a shelter, and he's 3 years old. Now they had to be sent home from the White House. They had to be sent back to Delaware because there was an incident with one of the Secret Service members, a new Secret Service person who there was some kind of incident that there was definitely tooth contact made. Whether it scratched the person or it actually drew blood, we don't know, but the incident was serious enough for the dogs to go back to Delaware, which is where the Bidens live, and when they're not at the White House. So of course, everybody is now an armchair trainer, right? And I did come out with PPG, and we issued a statement saying we're here to offer support to the Bidens if they need it. There were other things that I saw on social media and in the paper, some really good stuff and some really bad stuff. And some of the really bad stuff was, well, this dog is obviously his obedience. He needs to have more obedience. He needs to have more obedience training, or he needs to go through like another obedience training 101 program. And I think that's what encouraged me to sort of start putting it out on social media that, okay, I of course, that's, even the positive trainers out there are definitely getting on board. But then I sort of stuck my oar in and I went, no, this dog does not need more obedience training. This dog, in order for these dogs to be able to go back to the White House and to be successful there, we need to understand, especially Champ, but both of them, but understand especially Champ's experience of the situation, what the emotions that he is experiencing, and we need him to feel safe. We need to set up the environment for success. And so you need to have somebody go in there, if they are going to have somebody go in there who really understands what setting your environment up for success means, not just managing the White House where the dog can and can't go, but it's so led. There are so many things we need to do. That's just obviously a very high profile example, but it's something we need to be thinking about for every dog. And so, yes, you're not saying that, no, you don't need to change behavior but it's how we think about changing behavior.
And also, yeah, I think there's it's a really good example to highlight the Biden's dogs, because not just because of the case itself, but the plethora of thoughts and input about what we should do, the bulk of which, positive or punitive, was still about, like you say, increased in training. We need to get this dog doing more. The thing is this, we know why we do our own behavior, right? We know why we act the way we do. We know that much of that is either conscious and a kind of self-regulated behavior that we do, or it's a subconscious kind of reflexive behavior that we do. Either way, it's going to be of use to us if it's natural to us. We have to put a question mark there about if we do loads more training and get loads more behaviors from the dog, regardless of the methods, are those behaviors actually innately useful to these dogs regarding the emotional experience that was triggering the behavior in the first place? Kathy Murphy came up with a great expression, which is seeing behavior as a barometer. And I think this is why we're sometimes asking the wrong question. So if people might say, oh, yeah, well, what are we going to do then? If we're not going to change the behavior, if we're not going to do more training, what are we going to do? It's kind of the wrong question. Because the first question should be, what are these dogs experiencing? What are they trying to communicate through this behavior? What is actually happening that they can't make good self-regulatory choices so that they can find an exit from conflict and they're having to bite? And it's a big change in how we ask those questions. So when we think about processing is the big thing for me, especially internalizing. So punishments and reinforcements from a kind of an operant point of view mean nothing to the individual unless they're internalized. So a good example for this is, say at I use this example on my talk actually. At school, you've got a teacher who has used the usual punishment and reinforcement with the class in that kind of connected way. So the kids are now behaving. So we would make the assumption that kids have learned to behave. But then when you get a kind of a temporary teacher come along, or whatever you call them in the States, suddenly the class turn into feral kids, right? Because that's just what happens. I remember that. So have the kids actually learned to behave? Or are they behaving based upon those external reinforcers and punishers? And it's this thing about internalizing. Has the dog learned something fundamental to their safety, to their existence, to their emotional recovery? Or have they just learned to do something? When we think about speed cameras, right? People, I would class myself at this because I'm a responsible driver. I have learned to drive carefully because I recognize the consequences and I want to do that. Many people who slam on the brakes at the speed cameras have just learnt about the punishments and the kind of reinforcers from the environment. They haven't internalized it. So I think this is an important conversation, Victor. And that's why when we start delving into it, we think, yeah, there's a lot more that we need to consider here. And a lot of the behaviors that we teach dogs from a young age, how useful are they? Now, some of them are important, right? You did a great one recently talking about why do we get sick all the time? Why? Because we kind of do, right? Because it's cool and it's easy to train. Some of them are important, like getting a good recall. It's important, right? Because we need to think about it. But then even then, I would never want my dogs off leash in an environment that I thought there was any risk or danger. I live on a beach here in the UK, and there's a big kind of promenade with the grass, and I'm surprised how many people let their dogs off there with the main road next to it, because you just never know, right? So this it's just a different way of starting to think about things, especially this idea about internalizing and processing. What is the dog actually processing? And when you start thinking about it as an entire topic, you realize how enormous it is, because almost every area of what we do with dogs, we kind of need a rethink, right? Which is a bit of an outrageous thing to say from me, I know, but we kind of do, even from puppies. Most puppies go to even well-done puppy classes. The first thing that happens is we're going to start teaching this, we're going to start teaching this, next week we're going to teach this. What hasn't actually happened with many classes, some I know they do, but the norm isn't where we're actually thinking, right, let's learn from puppy first. How does this puppy explore the environment? How does this puppy process? What are its processing needs? What are its processing criteria, its preferences? What's its learning style? Because that gives us a better way to truly educate rather than just train for that pup, because the pup's having some agency in that learning process. And on my talk,
we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew. We'll just take a quick break and we'll be back with you after this message. We are back. This is a fascinating conversation. We have a little bit of delay between Andrew because Andrew's in the UK and I'm here in the United States, so bear with us. But I know we had to have that little break, but this is just ticking all of my boxes, because this is where this has been lost. I know you've mentioned a little bit about before that we've become so focused on training that just letting the dog be and observing and understanding has sort of been lost. and I feel like we need to bring this back now. The reason why I say that is not that 20, 30 years ago people were had decided to make this decision that they would actually watch their dogs a little bit more. It's just that all those years ago, dogs fulfilled more of a kind of work function, and they just kind of were. I take a look at my grandmother's beagles, for example. She bred beagles. She was a hobby breeder. So she didn't breed for the money. She bred for the love of the breed, the betterment of the breed. And her dogs were never trained in that sort of formal sense of the word. And she was just typical, pretty much, of most dog people that just didn't do that formal training. Yet her dogs were very happy. They listened to her, and she had a great relationship with them. But then training has become such a focus now, and then especially with media, including my show. But then I hope at least that we teach people to do it in the right way, even though I have evolved since my show began. But others where still now there is such an emphasis on training. So how are we going to be able to get it back to and sort of maybe have a happy medium? How are we going to do this?
I think it starts with education, of course. Well, actually, I guess it starts with conversation. Like us now, we're talking about stuff. And from my point of view, I try and anything I do from a talk point of view or teaching point of view, I guess I try and do it in a neutral way. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just trying to ask some questions and let people take away what they need from that to think about how they do things. And there's been a bit of a shift to operant training, especially becoming the toolkit, rather than recognizing it's a valuable tool in a wider toolkit, which includes observations. What we don't do so well as an industry is teach about good observations. So what are good observations? We can all observe, of course we can, but this is why in my talk, I spend the first part of the talk actually examining why we are judgmental about behavior, because it's important for us to recognize those mechanics that make us so, and that leads into things like confirmatory bias and belief filters and all these kind of things. And that can actually get in the way of good observation, because we've got to kind of, first of all, we have to recognize our own biases, and then we kind of have to just park them at the door a little bit while we then look at doing good observation without judgment and label, something the amazing Sarah Fisher talks about a lot, of course. And I know she's very involved with your VSA for your students. So, of course, they get this. So, yes, I think having an initial dialogue, getting as many voices in from as many different disciplines as possible, like say the ethologists, the psychologists, the neurologists, looking to how we do things in other areas. Within the dog world, we have become a little bit, well, where's the science? So you'll say, well, there it is. Oh yeah, but that was humans or that was rats. Where's the science for dogs? As though somehow dogs are this magical unicorn creature that's different. And actually, I take a lot of inspiration for what I see at really progressive colleagues in human psychology working with children with behavioral challenges, how they are looking at that now, where they follow that child-centered care approach, where they're thinking, right, perhaps before the child slamming on the desk, which is a way of saying I need something, but perhaps a bit more, perhaps historically, there was a pressure to shift them to actually say, please. Now, especially when you think about things like total communication and methods like that, it's a case of, right, that's their preferred way of communicating. So let's go with that. Let's create it around their need, their emotional experience. So I think this is the thing we need to start thinking about, is just kind of having a broader way of looking at getting input from other fields. Then it comes down to education. And I think it's a case of letting our colleagues feel comfortable thinking along these terms. You don't have to think, well, hang on, this kind of makes sense, but now I'm a little bit scared because I've been doing this for a long time and I've learned all these things. All those things are still remain valid. It's just thinking about what end of the stick do we actually focus on? Do we focus on the behavior bit or the emotional bit? And allowing people a chance to start thinking more about the emotional bit. Sometimes I've used operant training where I know it's not giving relief to the dog. I know that. But I know it's giving relief to the carer. And why shouldn't I? Right? Why shouldn't we sometimes? We've got to get that balance, especially in situations where people's own mental health are in trouble, people's relationships, maybe even their ability to stay in that home because they're in social housing and things have to go. If we need to get a reliable behavior that means that some of those extra stresses have gone, then we will do that. And that's absolutely fine, Victoria. It's not a case of thinking, oh, we must only do things based upon the animal's sense of relief. But we just have to make sure we can make an informed choice about the bigger picture. And we need to explore the emotional experience to do that. Both, I worked with a client going back a little while where the dog had vibrate collars on when it barked in the home because the dog had been barking and they'd had a complaint. In fact, they'd had several complaints and they were on a final warning. And the two previous people that had gone in, both of them said that they would only work with them if they took the collars off now. And the problem there, of course, was that these people were going to be kicked out of their social housing. So I had to go in and think, right, do you know what? This is what it is at the moment. I'm not going to make any kind of expectations on you now. This is where our goal's going to be. And we have to shift through. And this is the thing about stepping off that operant merry-go-round a little bit. We can get very fanatical about our little bit of the quadrant or whatever we want to think about and not think about the emotional experience for the carer as well as the dog. And I think it's important to look at those things. That's quite an extreme example, I know. And actually, we were able to get them the help they need and get the collars off the dog. That's the point. We were able to do that. And actually, by focusing on there, what I find is when we start talking about emotional experience, I use a lot of human examples because we're humans, right? But the neurology and physiology supports that the dogs have a similar neurological and physiological function behind these things. When people start to feel it themselves and think, I kind of know what that feels like. I kind of know how that experience would be for me. They can really buy into the process then of moving things forward for the dog. But it's helping our colleagues to understand this, first of all, and then to have the right kind of training to do the good bit, to do the good observations. I'm going to come back to observations in a second. And then finally, to know how to actually communicate this. And this is something I've heard a lot when I've given talks. Professionals saying to me, this is actually, I get it, I really get it. But when I turn up, I feel under a huge amount of pressure to show that client that I can change that behavior. How do I have this conversation with the client? So that's education. That's a part of the education right there just on its own, really, about educating professionals so they know what to say and how to deliver it, so that the clients can buy into it. I know when I turn up, that first 20 minutes is everything for me. I've got to get my clients to see it and to get it in that first 20 minutes so that everything else will unfold. The observation thing is also really important. How do we do this in practice? For me, it's all about starting with observations, and it's having those observations without judgment and label. It's the watch, wait, and wonder, the 3 W's, which a friend of mine, Andrea Breen, told me about, and I think, I like that. We just got to watch, wait, and then wonder, ask those questions. And that's about slowing down environment. So if you've got a dog-dog problem, that's what I kind of specialize in. I do a lot of dog-dog issues. When that dog first comes up to my facility, which is just a field, really, sounds really posh, a facility, but it's a field. When they turn up to my place, it could be that 1 or 2 sessions before I introduce a dog doing setup. because I've got to learn from this dog. I need to find out, okay, how are you? My name's Andy. Who are you? How do you process me? How do you process the environment? When that noise goes off in the background, how did you deal with that? What are those subtle changes that I see? How do you orientate in the environment? Orientation is really important for us mammals, how we move, how we feel we need to move. This is why I think, this is just my own kind of theory on things, why so many dogs struggle on leash, because their natural ability or their natural need for that relief seeking we were talking about earlier, to be able to orientate in the environment is taken away from them. So there's no point in me trying to introduce the dog before I've learned as much as I can from this dog about just them as a dog, as an individual, how they individually process. Because then I can build a program, a support program, and I don't call them training programs, it's a support program based upon those needs. And if I'm going to use reinforcement, because of course I do, I want to try and reinforce behaviors that are innately useful to the dog. Sorry, my dog's whinging in the background. It's nearly time for dinner. So I want to, and this is the thing to think about, reinforcing behaviors, changing behaviors is great. There's nothing wrong with it per se. We just have to think, are we actually offering that relief to the animal? So if we can see a behavior which has been seen to be challenging, or maybe the carers have felt they can't live with, or it's difficult. If we are going to use reinforcement, and we can reinforce a new behavior that still offers the relief that the animal was seeking, the dog was seeking, then that's the win-win. That is what we ultimately want to try and achieve. And it is about slowing things down. You know, Sarah Fisher's the best person to have to talk about this because she's amazing. But it is about slowing things down and just changing things a little bit. What we can do very easily with training, and especially in Operant way, is we go in all guns blazing because we've got our training Operant toolkit there. We can do loads of funky stuff. And it's just a race to see how quickly can I change this behavior. And the dog's this kind of passive traveler on that, rather than being involved in it.
But, you know, when you're saying that, obviously we have to provide relief for the client too. That's really important. And gosh, yes, a support system. I like to be able to set the people that I work with and the dogs up for success by providing a support system. And even if there is no behavior issues, that we put a support system in place so it prevents, we allow the dog to become more comfortable, and we facilitate the dog to become more comfortable in this environment. So we can prevent any behavior problems from happening. We call them problems. Obviously, they're behaviors for the dog that make a lot of sense. It's just not so great for us. But I think this idea of support is very valuable. However, what happens when you have a client that says, Andrew, I need this done, and I need this done quickly. I have no time to, great, understand, I got to observe my dog, great, no, but you need to fix this today. Otherwise, the dog is going to go back to the shelter, or the dog is going to the shelter, or there's nothing I can do and the dog's going to have to be put down. What do you say to people like that? Because I've had people like that. Oh my gosh.
And we all have them.
That's tough.
This is the thing about, I like to front load as much as possible. So I also recognize my own emotional experience in that kind of conversation, by the way. And I think a lot of anybody listening who are jobbing professionals know how important it is for us to be able to recognize what we can actually do sometimes. Sometimes, some of the paths that open up to us will be very dangerous for us to go down for our own emotional health and our own emotional experience. So add that in. So I think it is a case of getting them to recognize the importance of their dog's emotional experience and emotional need, because hopefully then they're less likely to think, right, okay, I can see there's no quick fix here. The thing to offer them is how we can look at, through data collection, observations, and identifying the core triggers that are adding in for this dog, about good management to start off with. Management is seen as almost like a dirty word. I see a lot of posts, even by respectable trainers who are positive reinforcement, who almost say, oh, don't listen to all this stuff about management, let's just get on it. If we train more, we'll be fine. And I think, well,
yes, oh my gosh, Andrew, I agree. I agree. I see that all the time. of people saying, oh, all these stupid positive trainers, all this is focusing on management. Let's just forget that. Let's get on with it. Oh my gosh, you've missed such a massively important and valuable and powerful tool that we have in our toolkit.
And we have to start there. I use my snake analogy. I think I've mentioned it before with you, but I'll mention it again because it's a really good one. And it's one that I use with my clients. So people can use this if they want, because it's a really good way to really quickly get in there. So I say to people, let's just imagine somebody doesn't like snakes very much. And a snake comes along, they're going to have an emotional experience around that snake. That's going to trigger a reaction in them internally. And that in turn will present itself as a behavior, say screaming and shouting. If I've decided as the calm bystander, the important word there is calm because I'm rationalizing it. They're in an irrational state. If I decide I don't want the behavior, and that is all I'm interested in, I only have two options. I either treat them punitively and get them to stop it because my narrative is I don't care, I just want you to stop. And I might be able to suppress the behavior. The behavior might even stop, and so I'm happy, but I've done nothing about their emotional experience of the snake, and I haven't listened to what they were trying to communicate. But even using positive reinforcement, and this is really important, and it's a tough one to hear, I know sometimes. If I'm purely looking at changing behavior, and I'm not going to use punitive means, I'm going to use positive means, there is a risk that I end up getting behavior that I find more appropriate, that it still isn't any use to them around their emotional experience to the snake. So if we're going to start thinking about the emotional experience, what do we do? Well, first of all, I have to recognize, that behavior is really annoying me. I have to recognize that. That's why I've got my thing. I don't like this behavior. It's bad. It's naughty. I need to recognize that. Then I need to take a breath and step back and think, but what's the actual picture telling me, right? If I actually look at it, there is something about when the snake appears, the person isn't coping. So actually now I recognize, right, the behavior, whilst it annoys me and upsets me, isn't the problem. In fact, the snake isn't the problem. It's just wiggling along doing his own thing. The problem is how they feel about the snake. So if I'm going to help them, what do we do? Again, we have two options. The first thing is keep them away from snakes. And now management becomes more obvious, right? Because if your dog can't cope being around dogs, keep them away from dogs. It's not forever and ever. It could be forever and ever. And I say it can be. It's a completely valid thing. If I can keep this person away from snakes for the rest of their lives, great. If I can distract them when a snake's around, great. But if not, then I have to think, well, what's my other option? The other option is to change how they feel about snakes, to change how they process. And again, we instantly think, oh, well, that means we must have a counter-conditioning program. Maybe, but not necessarily. When we think about a lot of the work that goes on, especially with things like bat work, things like Sarah Fisher does with free work and that kind of thing. This is dogs actually being able to be given the time and the space to be able to have an internal process of thinking, oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable, I'm not really sure, let me kind of work this out, and find ways themselves naturally. And this is the self-regulatory process, which actually Mother Nature is really good at. If you look at animals in nature, they're not dysregulating. They're acting in the moment based on how they feel, looking for relief and getting it. And if they're still alive at the end of that process, brilliant, because of course they could get eaten, right? But that's just the normal way. Us humans have created a really complicated way of messing up with that process, and we've kind of passed that on to our dogs, right? So counter conditioning isn't always the thing to jump into, but the point is that example with the snake is a good one, and it shows the power of that. Now, if that client is still saying to me, well, it's all very good and well, but I'm sorry, if this isn't changed by tomorrow, then the dog's going back to the shelter. I need to say, look, I can change it right now if we do this, this, and this to take the pressure off your dog so that we can relieve the pressure they're having. And if they're still not getting that, I do have to ask myself, well, is this the client for me? I know that's harsh, but I think the temptation is to think that somehow we have to go in and fix and save every dog. But I genuinely think madness that way lies. I know I've done it myself, Victoria, in the past, and invariably I've burnt out from it. Because and also there are some people in the industry who say that compliance is our responsibility. How can it be without me physically moving in? How do I know they're going to do stuff? I can just offer my guidance and my education. And if I can offer them an operant solution that might get them by, then like I said earlier, I would totally do that. If I can say, okay, let me show you this. This will be a temporary thing. But if they don't buy into that dog's emotional experience, are they the right carer for that dog anyway? And I think if they were talking about euthanasia...
That's what I was... that's what I was going to say. Should this person be having a dog in the first place?
Well, see,
We know that a lot of people get dogs to serve their own needs. We know that. How can we be advocates for their dog and encourage them to advocate for their own dog? And I think what you're talking about with relief and taking the pressure off, being that support, that's advocating for your dog. Allowing, I think the reason why I like BAT a lot and I like ACE is that free work is that it's allowing the dog to, even if the dog is on the lead, especially with BAT, that if the dog says, I'm done, the person recognizes that and will move away with the dog. You know, you were talking about the dog loses the ability to act naturally when it is on the lead. And that is a problem because that can really exacerbate just nervousness and cause this reactive behavior because they don't have the ability to put sufficient distance between themselves and the threatening stimuli. Now we're coming to the end of the podcast, and this has been an amazing discussion, and I'm so excited for people who are going to come to the conference, for attendees to hear more of what you have to say on this subject and how absolutely powerful it is. If you can just maybe kind of leave us with, I don't know, maybe some nugget of information, which of course I'm hoping that people who are listening to this are going, that their minds are exploding and they're like, yes. What is something that somebody can do now for their own dog? Whether it's got a behavior problem or not.
You know what? I think it comes down to that observation, that watch, wait and wonder. So if you're going out for a walk with your dog, slow down yourself. Or if one of your family members has got the leash, just watch and just look at all the things. I took a 20-second clip of my dog with my husband, just as a random 20-second clip. And I play it now to all my clients because there is so much in that 20 seconds, seeing how Arthur needed to move over to the wall when somebody appeared, because Arthur's a bit sensitive with people, looking at how Arthur kept checking in with him and looking at the environment about why was he checking in at that particular time. So I think just give your dog chance to tell you some things, give your dog chance to show you through their behavior. If we stop judging behavior and just start looking at it as an expression of self, you'll learn so much more about the integral part of your dog, and they will love you for it. So observation. I think that's the best thing we can do.
Video is so important. If you are out on a walk, like Andrew was saying, if you are out on a walk, have somebody video you with your dog. As you're walking down the street, just have your friend, your family member video you and your dog, and just watch, observe behavior. Thank goodness we've got our cell phones that we can do that now. When I started It's Me or the Dog, we weren't able to do that. We had massive cameras. And then if we wanted to see the dog's behavior in the house when we weren't there, then of course we had to rig a whole load of cameras up. Now we don't have to do that. We've got webcams. We've got all kinds of wonderful ways in which we can video and observe behavior. Andrew, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I have so much enjoyed this hour that we've spent. And I really hope that you at home, you listeners, have enjoyed. Please, we hope to see you register for the Dog Behavior Conference, April the 16th to the 18th. You can hear more of Andrew Hale and then the wonderful Kathy Murphy that will be speaking with Andrew on this topic and taking this topic to another level as well. Is also going to blow your mind. But we really hope that we can see you there. We will see you, or I will see you, and Holly will be back for next week's podcast. Andrew, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks, Victoria. See you again.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively Podcast. For more information, visit positively.com. Get connected on Facebook and YouTube as Victoria Stilwell, or follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps to change dogs' lives positively.